Our protagonist was a fatty and unsocial. He didn't like socializing with other people, and that's why he stayed quiet do his work. He didn't have a girlfriend, and in past he was even cheated on. But while he was living his miserable life of going home to work, work to home, something happened in the world. It kind of became a game and everyone had skills, etc. As our protagonist already had experience with archery, he chose this class. The guy didn't miss a shot. And in this story, you will see our protagonist becoming very strong, one of the most formidable in the world. And he was at that moment next to a girl with purple hair. He starts to look at her softly, and he wonders if she wouldn't be looking at him by any chance. The girl starts a conversation saying that in any case, she wanted to know how his weekend was. He said it was kind of good, clumsy, and asks how it was hers. That girl said it was great, and she said he knew. She and her husband tried to go fishing in the lake, but in that weather it was horrible, and after a while she leaves. He is alone in the elevator wondering what was wrong with him, and ends up putting his hand on his forehead. He commented that making friends was very difficult. He accepted that job in an office out of state to try to start from scratch. But years have passed, and he still couldn't get it right, could not communicate with people in this society who value social skills above all else. He didn't know if he would ever fit in and be able to make friends. He also commented that the only sports that he tried to practice as a child were those that he could practice alone in the case of archery. But the world was not made for people like him, and at that moment he was in the office. So at that moment, he stayed there for hours, and it was only 9 o'clock in the morning. The hours passed, and he was in a city with no family and an office where almost no one knows your name. At that moment, it was noon until someone out of nowhere appears calling your name. Jake, that guy, said that some of them were going out to lunch and asked if he wanted to go. But then Jake said that except for Adam, he is a born leader and his complete opposite. But he liked him even though he didn't care about doing the heavy lifting. In a conversation which made things a lot easier for our Jake, Jake said that normally he refused these invitations. But maybe with Adam, it's not that strange, and in the end, he ends up agreeing with his hand behind his head. After a while, they start waiting for the elevator until it opens. Two girls appear until that guy asks if they also wanted to have lunch together because he had a company card. Jake explains that it is one of the few positive points of working at that place. She touches the leader's shoulder and said he was going to be fired one of these days because of how often he uses that card. She also notices our Jake and says that it was very strange to see him hanging out with people like that. He gives a smile and starts to think that she never says his name, and he wonders what the chances are that she doesn't know his name so she doesn't talk right. He starts to think that, on the other hand, his attention is usually focused elsewhere, until suddenly that elevator starts to shake and everyone there is wondering what it could be. That blonde guy said it was okay, it was just an electrical problem, and they all didn't need to panic until another tremor appears, but more violent. That guy shouts at Jake. Our protagonist activates the emergency, and that red-haired girl ends up asking what was going on there until suddenly the light goes out, and that woman in the back wonders why the lights had gone out. But that guy said everything was fine, they just had to stay calm. But suddenly an unknown blue window appeared in front of everyone. But it wasn't just them who were in the elevator. It was other people who were outside too. And the scene even cuts to a guy who was in space. That window appears to him too, and he was commenting on the universe. 93, he said it was more lambs to the slaughter, until suddenly something happens and our protagonist wonders where he was. At that moment, there was a strange creature in his path. He ends up saying hi, obviously like a normal person. Jake is extremely scared and asks what that was. A 5-minute countdown appears, and that entity said that she was the entity in charge of presenting his new reality to him. They had a limited time, so he would make an introduction and ask him to continue. Jake asks what kind of new reality he was talking about. A system window appears and shows that his race was human. He had no class, no profession, and his status was very low, like he had never seen anything like this, and he asked himself what it was. That entity said it was his system list with its various statistics, in addition to having some other pertinent details for his new reality. He also explained that the system began its initiation when his universe finally exceeded the minimum limit. This limit was necessary to enter the multiverse. Any information would also be transmitted to him as he needed to know. Jake looked around and said he couldn't tell if it was incredible or absurd. That entity points to him and said that now he would go to classes. He begins to see that there were several types of weapons. He wonders if he should choose any of them, and the entity told him that he was right. He starts to think that each of the classes comes with different stat bonuses and proficiencies, but everything seemed more or less self-explanatory. The launcher seemed like a great choice, but there should be something better until he finds something and says it was exactly that. The blue system window saying that he had chosen the archer class. That entity said that the time scheduled for the introduction was coming to an end. He also said that he would be momentarily transported to the large forest tutorial zone. He is very surprised by this. The entity explained that the Great Forest had several monsters and opportunities for newly initiated races such as the protagonist. Various beasts roamed the forest hunting their prey. And it was necessary to kill these beasts to acquire points of tutorial or IP, whether he would be able to gain more very powerful skills. He explained that he would also have the chance to hunt the Lord Beasts, and Jake asked how long this tutorial would last. The entity said that the tutorial would last approximately 64 days, when the remaining survivors would receive rewards based on their IP. The entity said that would be all he could say for now until Jake realized he was turning blue, and he wonders if this was the teleportation. He could feel the adrenaline bombarding through his body, and he was getting excited about this situation. A blue window appears saying that the intro sequence was complete and ends up welcoming him to the tutorial. The scene cuts to the forest. Everyone who was in the elevator at that moment was in that place, and they were wondering what it was all about. Jake, looking at his bow, said that it wasn't that bad. That forest really was gigantic, and that blonde guy told them to relax because he knew everyone was confused, but they needed to breathe a little and understand the whole situation until the floor starts shaking. The group leaders said that everyone would fall, but everyone was supposed to stay calm, and Jake explained that at that time he would have liked to have known one thing. Vacations weren't the only things in the hunt, and at that moment they were walking down a trail. At the same time, there was another group of people who were walking until suddenly that guy tells everyone to stop and asks if they had heard that he gets ready and says he knew that he was there and asked that guy to show himself. That blonde guy ended up apologizing, but he asked that guy to please not attack him. According to that guy, he was trying to find his group again, and that woman with green hair said that it was just a child, while that guy said that it was okay he wouldn't attack. They asked that boy when was the last time he had found his group, but the boy said they had been attacked, and when they got there, he separated during the fight. That guy with black hair said that it was hours ago, while that green-haired girl said that they could be anywhere. At that moment, the guy puts away his sword and says everything was fine. And he asked why the boy didn't go with them, because while that woman grabbed his shoulder and said that they would try to help him find his group, that boy was very happy. He was very grateful for everyone's help there. He even commented that he was very scared there since he was alone. But what they didn't notice is that his gun had blood on it. The scene cuts back to our protagonist's group. That woman with red hair asks the leader what they should do at that moment. Another guy desperately asks if anyone else has met that weird alien. The leader said that everything would be fine. They were supposed to take one step at a time, and the protagonist is starting to think that he really was a natural leader. They started walking again, and the leader said everything was fine. They would start locating a shelter, water, and food based on the other pillars he saw above probably meant they weren't the only survivors. A girl starts to be impressed as she had managed to use magic. And the protagonist said that this time would be crucial for them to learn their skills and get the hang of this unknown system again. Jake also said that the group was pretty even, at least for the most part, while the leader was holding a deer. An arrow comes from far away and ends up hitting that animal right there. We could now realize that the protagonist is not too bad with a bow. He is good. After a while, that girl starts to heal the leader at the same time. He was a little embarrassed, and Jake said that Caroline was also his only healer, but she was slowly getting the hang of it. After a while, everyone was by a bonfire. Caroline ends up saying that Proto was very good with a bow, praising his aim, and Jake is even happy that she really knew his name. But he literally says nothing and looks down until the group leader ends up touching Jake's shoulder. Jake said he wasn't prepared for this. He really wouldn't be able to talk to people like those two could. The leader said that this was a new world. The old rules no longer applied there. A few hours pass, and at that moment, it was the first watch of the night. Most were asleep, but our protagonist was still awake. That woman with purple hair said that her husband was going to meet her for lunch that day. And probably there were a few more 100 meters between the two of them when everything went crazy. And she ends up asking if Jake had a girlfriend, But he said no, and he starts to think that he never should have to because he wasn't good at it. He explains that in college he had two friends, truly. One was called Andy and the other Madeline. Wendy was his roommate and an incredible guy. Jake said he was the type of person he could trust with his life, and he starts talking about Madeline. She was his love. He loved her. None of them were of the social type, but they liked solitude together. Those were the two happiest years of his life. Or maybe he had just convinced himself of that. But he was blind to what was happening under his nose. And that girl with purple hair said that maybe he's better off alone, just thinking that your husband might do that. His stomach was in knots with anxiety, and Jake starts to think at that moment that he should say something. That woman ends up getting up and asking him for permission. She ends up leaving the place and starts to think that Adam thought he should be a leader and Jonah was opening up to him, and Caroline even remembered his name earlier. He starts to think that maybe this time Adam was right. Maybe things could be different there since things were no longer the same until a scream from the forest ends. When Jake appears, he wastes no time and starts running towards that girl. There were 3 men. That guy wanted to know where her group was and asked her to tell him politely, even though she kept saying she didn't know. But that guy said he was supposed to do it his way at that moment, and he ends up launching an attack on her leg. But suddenly several arrows appear. One of them ends up piercing one of them in the neck, but the others manage to defend. The guy who said he came from that direction asked the other person to go and catch him. That extra immediately starts running after the protagonist, but he realized that there was nothing around until Jake appears in the background. He ends up cutting that guy with an arrow, but simply that guy was very resistant and manages to throw Jake away. He grabs his giant axe and starts screaming and tries to hit Jake, who manages to defend with his bow, but he knew the bow wouldn't last so much. He starts looking at that girl, and he realizes that she had passed out because of the pain. But in that moment, he would have to know where that other guy was, and when he least notices and looks back, he was preparing a blow. He wonders what he should do in that situation until an arrow ends up appearing, and at that moment Jake starts to think that he was probably going to die there until he closes his eyes and starts to concentrate. He could feel the presence of those two there. He realizes that it seemed like time was slowing down, but he knew it wasn't because of magic or some spell. A system window appears, the lineage awakened. He had the lineage of the Primal Hunter, and at that moment he realized that this was his pure instinct. His eyes start to turn red, and he easily dodges that attack as if it were nothing. And that arrow he manages to hold, he catches it and ends up throwing it at one of them, piercing his chest, consequently making that extra fall. Looking at his hands, he was in disbelief at what had happened, but he wasn't going to hesitate and ran to try to get a dagger. He ends up defeating that other guy in the end, but there were several other arrows in his direction. But with his instincts refined, he manages to block them all, and he asked everyone to go after him because he would beat everyone up. An unknown guy ends up appearing in the bushes. He soon gets scared because he had seen the protagonist. He advances on the protagonist and grabs his coat with a dagger in his hand. He asks what the hell he was, but Jake just grabs an arrow and puts it in his eyes. Slowly, that guy obviously falls to the ground in agony while Jake prepares another arrow and pierces his chest. He starts placing several arrows, and after the group has arrived at the place, they are horrified with the scene that was there. The leader realizes that there were 2 people there and Jake was delirious, saying that he had defeated them. He ends up remembering a time when he was returning from school. He saw a girl being bullied. He had 3 boys around her. One of them said he would copy her test the next morning, but the girl asked if she would get caught because she would have a lot of problems with that. But that blonde guy said that no one would catch her. That was just for them to see when the teacher wasn't looking. She said she didn't know and she was very desperate. She even said that she could try to help them study or something like that, that would be better. But one of them said that there was no time and ends up slapping her. So he did the only thing he thought would make sense and tried helping her. He bumps into a guy holding him, shouting to leave her alone. They both end up falling to the ground. Well, that guy asked what he was trying to do, and he started trying to do a rear naked choke on him. But he realized it turns out that when it comes to good guys and bad guys in our world, we don't have a difference. The group's healer asked Jake if he was hurt because there was a piece of blood underneath him. He told her that he was 100% okay, and even said that that blood was definitely not his until he wonders what that was. A blue message appears in a system window. The window says he had killed a level 12 human. The bonus experience obtained when defeating an enemy above your level would be granted. He noticed that they got points for killing other survivors too, and he looked at the system with a smile on his face. He wonders if that was the new skill. He was in the archer class. He had reached level 4, his race was human, and he had reached level 20. Furthermore, he had points allocated to. He also had managed to obtain the awakened bloodline, the hunter's bloodline primeval. Bloodline's ability was unique. The power of giving mind resides in your very essence of being. Unlocks the cools of perception and achieves high fives of. Jake wondered what kind of thing this so-called bloodline was. The group leader asks who those guys were and why they attacked them out of nowhere. Jake explained that skill points and experiences from the tutorial can probably be gained with that fight. Now starts trying to save that girl's leg, and one of them said that they needed to reconsider their survival strategy. They had to have found a safe place to hide because it was very dangerous, and that way they could wait for this tutorial or something until someone. Jake's attention is drawn to the group's healer. She asks Jake why Jonah was alone in that place all the time. Jake explains that she was feeling anxious and it seemed like she needed space, but the healer said that at that moment she was not well. It was worse. She explained that her leg was much crushed, and her healing couldn't do much, and she asks what they should do in this situation. Jake starts asking her if she was blaming him. So the group leader tries to calm things down by saying no. He had saved her, but he still had doubts as to why Jake had let her go alone. He could at least have woken them up. He asked what Jake was thinking in this situation. Jake ends up excusing him, saying that it was a decision made in a split second, and he simply followed his instinct. She ends up asking if he could think more next time because they were human. They weren't beasts that act carelessly. She would ask if he had died in that place. But then Jake said that he had already said that he was sorry, but then the healer shouted, asking if Jonah had died there. Silence prevails in the place. But then Jake asks her, shouting if she would control herself. He explained that Jonah had only survived because of what he had done, and if he had time to wake them all up, who knows what would have happened to her. The D comes close to the leader and said that these were real humans, not servants, and he asked if they would have the courage to take the life of another person to save Jonah. He points to them and said that the world has changed and everyone needs to stop expecting to hold hands. Hey guys, if you also to go to a magical world, then subscribe our Manhwa Ghost YouTube channel now. By the way, they needed to adapt, learn to survive, and a guy with blue hair asks what he was suggesting they do. And Jake looks back and said that he suggested that they do what is necessary to level up and thus go through all that shit. He asked for them to do what the system wanted them to do and not blame it because they couldn't catch up a while. Passes, and it was daytime. Someone said that he had finally woken up. Jake said that it was Casper. He scratched his eye and said that he was kind of hoping that everyone had already abandoned him when he woke up. Casper said that some of them thought about it, but after they talked a little, they all agreed they needed to start carrying their own weight. Jake explains that Casper was used to getting rid of your oldest bro. Besides Adam, he is also probably the most he had a close friend. They bonded over their pathetic romantic lives. It was good to have an ally nearby, and at that moment Casper was looking at a message. Jake, with a smile on his face, said that he was still his friend until he looks at Jonah. They explained that they couldn't figure out how to save her leg, so it seemed to be the best option, and it had been Jonah's idea. At that moment, she had amputated her leg and inserted a support stick. The Sea Pest said that they hoped that when they leveled up, Caroline would be able to learn some kind of regeneration magic, and Jake said it was amazing she might be the toughest of them all. The world really seemed to be giving it. It's all that day. Jake commented that Bertram was by far the best fighter besides him, but Jonah was making good use of her long-range magic. Caroline was more impressive. Jake said that what happened to Jonah seemed to awaken something in her. There are potions in their equipment for beginners, but none of these potions are powerful enough to fix Jonah's leg, and after a while they were resting, and without knowing how to win more. Carolina ended up proving to be an invaluable triumph. They still hadn't exchanged a single word since the night before, and he wondered which one of them should speak first. Maybe just pretend nothing happened, and he starts to really think about it, saying it seemed like a good idea. An hour passes, and Casper asks Jake if he was sure about this option, and he said yes. He commented that it was just to play with him, and the CPZ hears that order, and he starts to think that everything was okay. He could feel the attack approaching. Trying to concentrate on his breathing, But that attack simply ends up hitting him. He begins to be asked why it wasn't working. His friend even asks if he was fine because he even tried not to throw too hard. Jake starts to think if maybe that sphere of perception only works when faced with real threats, and since Casper really didn't want to hurt him, this didn't trigger anything. The group leader ends up calling everyone saying to end it for today, they needed to find a shelter for that night. After a while, they found a cave, and they commented that it seemed like a safe place. They would at least be protected from the rain, but not other things, and that's why they had to be careful. Jack starts to think that this would limit the angle that people can cover all inside the cave. So they had to be careful out there, and he starts also thinking that while he remained on alert, he would be protecting the others from some attacks or threats. The group leader calls Jake and asks if he was still thinking about last night. Jake said he didn't want to just make the same mistakes again. The leader said he was sorry for having criticized him previously because he really didn't deserve it, and after a while he comes in front with a torch and tells everyone to go forward and find a good spot. Jake realized that Adam really was a goodman, and he really wouldn't know if this group would have survived that first day without his leadership. He realized that he too might not even be there anymore if it weren't because of Adam. He ends up having a memory of the first time he saw Adam. Adam asked if his name was Jake, with a smile on his face and putting his hand forward. Adam said he had asked him to be on his team and hoped he wouldn't mind it too much. Adam said Jake could call it a guess, but he thinks they would work very well together. He asked to let him take him to the exit, and Jake agreed with a little embarrassment. The scene cuts to the present again. They realize there is a wall and two paths. Everyone gets into a fighting position and the ground starts to shake. Suddenly, Jake told them that they needed to get out, and they started running while the rocks started to fall. They kept running to the exit until Caroline almost gets hit and Jake shouts her name. When apparently the stones were going to fall on top of her, something very unexpected happened. He was getting ready to give him momentum, holding his bow, and suddenly he goes at an extraordinary speed and manages to jump, managing to save Caroline. A piece of stone ends up falling and blocking the exit. They had kind of been totally separated. Rick asked her if everything was okay, and she replied that yes. Adam starts shouting Jake's name. He calls Caroline, also asking if she could hear him. Caroline said that they were on the other side, yes, and Jake told her that they should stay for a while, quiet because that cave was a little unstable and could be dangerous. He also said that without mentioning that there could be something hiding there. And Caroline, touching that rock, said there was a lot to move. They couldn't be able to get out simply. One of the guys said he was going to try to break through that wall with his axe, but Adam said that they shouldn't touch anything because everything could collapse. But the girl with purple hair was very scared and said that they couldn't just leave him there. But Adam tried to calm her down by saying that there were some other paths in that cave. They would just need to keep walking. They would have to cross somewhere. He starts to think that this wasn't necessarily true, but it's probably his best option. Jake ends up saying it was okay. They would go further and try to find something in the middle of the way. He starts to think that although they don't know what kind of beasts would be in that place, they probably would be fine alone. But his problem was protecting Caroline. What would he do if they were suddenly attacked? Caroline said they would be fine, and at the end she says Adam's name. She said that she definitely wouldn't die in some cave there. And Jake ends up giving a smile. An hour passes and Adam was walking with the others three. He wondered if this wasn't a bad idea, but another one comforted him, saying that those two were probably best suited to survive there much longer than the four of them combined. He explained that Jake makes him a little uncomfortable, but there is no denying that he is the strongest among them all there without counting on Caroline's cure. They would definitely be fine, but Adam doesn't understand and asks how. That guy said he agreed with the boy. Of course, they all needed to be stronger to get through this. But he said he saw Jake lying in a pile of blood, smiling like a crazy person. He was definitely not normal. Adam said he barely survived an attack. He couldn't blame a little strange behavior he had after a chaotic situation. But that guy said that people change in times of crisis and Jake is now a loose cannon. Adam simply manages and said he was a friend. He had to trust him. On the other side was Jake and Caroline. Caroline said to Jake that he was hurt, and he looked at his arm and said that it must be from Autumn. She said to him to stop because she was going to cure him at that moment, but he has doubts and asks if she wasn't angry. She explained to him that she wouldn't let his wound get infected just because they had previously disliked him, and she asked for him to stay still. At that moment, he starts to remember his conversation training. He had to do some question for her. She looks at him and says he should have tried to be more careful. They understood that he was strong, but no one was invincible. She also said that she was still learning these magic things, so she couldn't cure everything at any time. Jake ends up asking her why she chose her class of healing, but she simply responds with another question. She asked why he had chosen to be an archer. Jake simply says that he just chose the one he would be best for. Survival and everything. And she repeats the name survival. She said it's because that's why she had chosen a healer. She also commented that she didn't know much about the tutorial. She also said that she has played enough games to know that a healer would be the least chosen class, and Jake asks a question if she still played because it was surprising and she didn't expect that. But she said she didn't play anymore. She explained that her younger brother spent a lot of time in the hospital when they were children, and sometimes she was unable to visit him for weeks. So they insisted on playing online games together. Jake said in his thoughts that he didn't know she had a brother, and Caroline blushingly said that anyway. Everyone always makes her play healer because she was a girl, but she spoke that in the beginning she hated it. She wanted to be a fighter also, who doesn't like to cause a lot of damage, isn't it? But after a while, she began to notice that her companions always had difficulty finding groups, and she said that meanwhile, as a healer, people did everything they could to ask her to join the group. It didn't matter. Whatever game she was in, she could find someone who needed her, and she thought she imagined this tutorial wasn't very different from some random game. And as she moved his arm, she said she didn't know who she would meet in the forest, but she knew that if she could cure, it would be a lot worth protecting, and that's why she said that she had chosen to survive. Jake closed his eyes and said that this was very smart of her, and she sighs, asking him if he thought really that she was stupid. Or maybe he had never thought much about her. The day starts to think that maybe she's right. He thought he was in love with her this whole time, but maybe he never stopped to think about who she really was as a person. She said everything was fine. He was at that moment like a 100% new person, and she was tying the last knot on that cloth for the bandage. She ends up saying to him for them to start moving after a while. There were 2 routes, one to the left and one to the right. Caroline asks Jake what they should do in this situation. The PR looked closely and the walls made some noises. The plate was seriously concentrating as the girl called his name. He ends asking her if she could feel that. He commented that his sphere of perception had not yet been activated, but there was something wrong there. It's as if he could feel something down there. And down there were several blue eyes. Thousands. Jake gives a smile and says that there was something terrifying there. He wondered what kind of strange feeling was that. His instincts were warning him something, but part of him was being attracted. Because of this, he ends up telling her to take a look, but Caroline is even surprised, and she asks how come. Jake said that whatever was down, there was something very strong, and was meant to think about the experience points they could gain. But Caroline said they weren't looking for experience points, they were trying to find their friends back. The guy who ends up pointing and saying that they didn't know where they were at that moment, and he asks if that was the way to find them, but Caroline said that otherwise they would be heading straight towards danger, and she ends up crossing her arms. She said that besides that, the other path goes at least in the general direction where they came the first time, but Jake said that there was only one path there that guarantees the experience point they needed to fight and get that XP no matter what was down there. Caroline stays nervous and puts her hand on her forehead. She said that this was real life, and it wasn't something like a game. The day begins thinking she was right. He wasn't being logical, and it was true. He just wanted to fight. At that moment, Caroline said that she understood that it was fun for him, but she couldn't put them at risk because of their stupid choice. Even more so because of some points. She said that it was not a game for them, they were just trying to survive. And Jake asks her what to be stronger was wrong with wanting was given the opportunity for an incredible life. He commented that things could be different at that moment. They could, by chance, do things that no normal human would think could have been possible just a month ago. He ends up telling her that all she wanted was to survive. She ends up saying that some of them just like the way things were before. She ends up saying that they weren't asked to become assassins, and she asks him if he could think about the group for a second and stop of acting so selfish like that. Jake looks up and starts to think that he wouldn't get anywhere like that. He sighs and ends up agreeing. They would take the safest route, and in the end, Caroline ends up thanking him. Some time passes, and the rest of the group was still walking. The girl with purple hair asked the others if they thought the 2 were okay. She was really hoping that they weren't attacked or something, but the other one said that with Jake there, they would be fine. Navigating that cave is the most complicated part. He said that his concern is high, but he was having trouble seeing very far away. That guy tells Adam that it was getting late, and if they didn't find them, then they should think about settling down and resting. But Adam said no. They had to keep walking until that guy touches Adam's shoulder and says it's already night. He says he could simply resume the search the next morning. He also told Adam to think about Jonah's leg, which was hurt no matter how much she said she was okay. Adam simply said they couldn't stop until knowing that they were 100% safe. And he raised the torch, trying to see something more ahead. The boy asks if he had heard that, but Adam already tells him to be silent. Suddenly they bend down and he goes out that torch. Adam tells everyone to get ready because something was coming, and the other guy gets Casper's attention. He asked if he could see anything in that dark, but Casper said that it was still very dark, and there was no way that cave was making some strange noises. Adam even started sweating nervously as he stared at that darkness that never ended. One of them said it was coming, and very quickly, but then Casper spoke to them to wait for the moment. Adam says Caroline's name while Casper gets up. Caroline said that she finally had found them, and Casper is surprised, saying that they were really fine. Caroline runs to Adam. That guy asked if there had been a problem, and Jake started to lay his head down and was a little nervous until Caroline said that nothing had happened. She started looking at Jake and said that there was just a lot of walk, and Jake looks at the ground. She looks at Adam and asks if they could find a different cave to sleep, a less foldable one than that one there. But the girl with purple hair is desperate because she saw something very ugly, and she ends up kicking one of the spiders that was there. She ends up apologizing and saying that it was just a spider. Casper gets down on his knees and says that she shouldn't kill spiders because they are important to maintain the ecosystem. He ends up taking her in his hand and asking her to see that little face. She was harmless, and then he starts walking again. The guy who was up front just told them to walk there outside the danger. And he continued holding that little spider. He said that there was his home until he realizes that there were several other spiders. He is surprised because there were a lot of spiders, and he said there must be a nest or something nearby. One of them said that maybe they should move soon, but Casper told them not to worry. Most spiders aren't really a threat to humans. But then that spider starts to get too close to him, and the team leader runs towards him, shouting his name, but already it was too late. That spider ends up biting him. Jake ends up taking his bow to prepare for the fight, while other spiders begin to slowly descend. They are practically surrounded while the girl with red hair asks what they were going to do. Casper told them not to move, and he was a little nervous, crying. There were a lot of spiders, even there was one that had red eyes. He was terrified when he saw her. She was gigantic. Gaspar starts to get very scared, but an arrow suddenly appears and hits that spider. The leader of the group ends up pulling Casper's arm, who was in shock, but he shouts for everyone to run away. That creature was going to try to kill everyone. At that moment, Jake starts throwing several arrows towards it, and for a moment the group leader starts to look back. Jake launches another arrow towards the spider, but it manages to easily defend. That spider was called a mammoth spider level 13. Jake was at that moment face to face with her, and he ends up smiling while everyone else started to run, and Caroline helped the other one, who was missing one of her legs, to run until the leader of the group was running. One of them shouted that they needed to run away as quickly as possible, until the leader of the group calls Jake, telling him to run too. But apparently Jake didn't really want to. He ends up apologizing while pulling out a dagger. He said that at that moment was his opportunity, and while one of the spider's attacks goes in his direction, he ends up cutting it and dodging its attacks, manages to pierce that spider's belly. Caroline screams that he couldn't wait for him, but Adam was still convinced he would have to wait for Jake. He said he wouldn't leave anyone behind. Jake ends up getting hit by that spider. He ends up flying at high speed, hitting the wall, and some of the stones start to fall, and Adam noticed this. Jake quickly managed to get up, but he said that it wasn't very good. He commented that he felt something noisy inside him, and a system window appears saying that the lineage has been awakened. He starts thinking about that instinct. He ends up grabbing one of his arrows as the spider opened its mouth and headed towards him. Suddenly, a red hour ends up appearing around him as he held the dagger and an arrow. A boulder was falling on top of him, and he realized that that cave was collapsing, and he had to be quick. He started to think that he wasn't running away from this. He ends up going towards the spider, defending himself from his blows, and he ends up remembering Coraline, saying that some of the people liked the way things were before, But he said that this old life just wasn't for him, and Caroline said that this wasn't a game for them. They were just trying to survive. And Jake starts to think that getting stronger is all that mattered at that moment because he had nothing else. He knew that no matter what it took, he had to get stronger. Adam was desperate because everything was falling, and he knew that that place wouldn't last long, but Jake was still trying. Adam knew Jake wouldn't listen to him. Jake was still frantically fighting that giant spider, and he starts to think that he had to make an attack to the left. He ends up dodging one of the attacks, and he starts to think that it was going very slow. He closes his eyes to concentrate. He holds his dagger tightly, saying he would just give a blow until he feels a giant hand behind him. That hand ends up being hit by the sword, and Jake realizes that the one who was there was Adam. Adam, even after a blow, pulls Jake, who is surprised by it. Adam was talking about not dying because of this, while Jake was staring at him, and suddenly everything starts to fall apart. They start to go outside. While that girl with the purple hair was desperate, she asked herself where Adam was until at the end, the two start to leave. Caroline says she saw that Adam was bleeding. Jake said he had cut him by accident. He explained that he thought it was the spider and just defended himself instinctively. Caroline, with an angry face, said, "Why the hell would he try to fight that thing even more after everything?" But Adam interrupts, saying everything was fine because he was alive. But one of those guys said that wasn't enough. He said that carelessness was one thing, but actively attacking another member of the group was already too far, and Jake tried to explain himself. Well, the guy said he couldn't let this pass any longer. Adam said it was just a scratch and asked if Caroline could heal it. She said yes, but there was a problem. That guy starts pointing at Jake and saying that he was the principal. That group couldn't work if they were constantly worried, and he starts saying that Jake was going to lose control sooner or later. Jake wonders if that's how they saw him. When he remembers Caroline saying they didn't ask to become killers, Jake realized that Caroline thought he was just a killer. The guy with blue hair continued, saying, he was saying that like a friend. Calling Adam's attention in situations like that one would get worse. And Jake starts to think that maybe they're right. Maybe he's just a risk to everyone in the group, or perhaps they are a risk for him. He ends up remembering that she had fainted from pain. He said that it was his concern for Jonah that made him distracted during a fight and let that guy get into his blind spot. Also remember Caroline's shield? He said he went to save Caroline, and that left him trapped in the cave. Also, there was an Adam too. If he hadn't stopped him, he would have killed that spider and thus gotten XP until out of nowhere someone notices something in the bush. Jake pulls out his bow and arrow and asks who was in that place. A guy appears unknown. He was holding his sword and introduces himself as Ricardo. He ends up saying that he heard their commotion at that rock fall and decided to investigate. He even asked him not to worry, they didn't have any intention of harming anyone. Meanwhile, Jake still held that arrow, aiming at him. Jake ends up looking at Adam. Adam says that they finally saw another human. He introduces himself as Adam, and they are his colleagues. They also had no interest in any conflict. But on the other side, that group was gigantic. That guy said there was no problem. The guy said that his and two other groups were similar to theirs. They even decided to come together to overcome everything. But Jake still wasn't confident as the guy continued saying that they needed all the people they could get. And so they would love for them all to join them. That blonde guy ends up smiling, but they weren't very confident, and that guy said that he understood if they were reluctant. But working together is in everyone's best interest at that moment. Coraline ends up grabbing Adam's arm, and that guy calls him a girl. He asked if, by any chance, she wouldn't be a healer. They already realized that that guy was after Coraline the whole time. Jake ends up remembering that she had cured him. And she was very helpful even after their conversation. She said that she became a healer because it was important that unknown guys said that their healer died not long ago after they entered, and they were out of potions too. He gives a smile holding his sword. He commented that to be frank with them, they didn't need them all, they would just take whoever they wanted who ends up slowly drawing his sword. He said that if the healer wanted to go alone, that would be fine for him. And Jake was quiet. But Adam comes in front, and he asks what would happen if Coraline said no. That guy just laughs, he said. He was a guy diplomatic. He wanted to deal with it peacefully and keep everyone happy, but his face changes completely. He said that he didn't need it. He kept saying that they would get out of there and go away with that healer one way or another. And Jake gets a little desperate. He starts trying to think of something. He had to do something. He looks back and realized that everyone was exhausted, and he had to be very careful there. And he knew he was the only one there who had enough energy to fight. He wondered if he could even catch that guy by surprise in some way, and he also wonders how many doses he would need too. There were a lot of people in his group that Guy told Coraline that they didn't want to mistreat her. They just needed her and her healing power. Jake was really trying to think of something. He said in his thoughts that there weren't enough of them for them to get away, and he wonders what they were supposed to do there until Adam calls Jake, taking his shoulder. He said that maybe they should go with them, but the other guy said that he didn't like the way that Guy looked at them. One of them said they couldn't be bad people. They could try to imagine surviving in that place without a healer. He said they were probably desperate, and that's why they were like that. Adam ends up asking Coraline. She said that she just didn't want to fight them. Jake starts to think that they were really considering it, and it was bad for Coraline. He simply said that he trusted Adam. Adam said that it was okay they would get together with those guys, but Adam suddenly thinks and says that maybe that was a good thing. Jake ends up calling Richard and asking him about his level. Richard said he was at level 9. They had a few others in their group at level 7 and superior. Richard ends up asking who he could be. Jake starts to think that that was perfect. Jake says he was a little disappointed. He was hoping he would be a little stronger. Jake says that his name is Eating Shit, and he was at the level. Screw you. Adam gets desperate and asks Jake what he was doing. Richard was a little nervous, and he said he was thinking he was close to an agreement at that place. But Jake told him not to worry, they would join him. But he didn't explain that he had bigger prey to hunt. Jake told him to also let him clarify something. He was leaving his colleagues to himself, so he had to take care of them, or there would be a problem. Richard asked if that was right. Jake just smiles and asks if that guy really thought he was the predator in that scenario. He points with his dagger, and he asks Richard how fast he thought his archers were, asking Richard if they would be faster than him to move and take his head off. At that moment, the archer was already getting ready, and Richard was a little nervous. Jake simply said he would be watching him, lastly, speaking his name, Richard. Richard calls the blonde guy, and they start to limp while Jake starts to think that according to him, Caroline would definitely be safer with him, and they would need her too. Besides, if they wanted to keep Caroline happy, they would at least protect Adam too. And with this threat, Richard should think twice before messing with others. They might not agree, but it's not like they didn't want the danger. He was really hoping he had this crazy plan. Adam simply tells Jake to wait, getting both of their attention. He asks Jake what it was. That's when Casper grabs his shoulder and asks if he was really going to go out. Jake gives a smile and says yes. He said he had his own goals for that tutorial. Jake said it was good for all of them. His chances of survival would be better with them than alone. He also told them not to worry. He would actually do the check, but someone raises their hand and asks to wait. Adam looks in his pocket and takes out some potions, and he asks Jake to be careful, calling him a friend. Jack ends up accepting and thanks him right away, and suddenly he starts to leave. Slowly, that blonde guy was thinking about doing something until someone speaks for him not to do anything. Richard looks back and said to that guy that he knew what to do and that extra. He already smiles, but he hardly expects what would happen to him. After a while, that guy was walking and said that it was a waste of time. He closed his eyes and continued walking, saying that if they weren't trying to get close to that healer or something, he would have just shot that archer in the back as he walked away. One of those guys said he was probably at level 5, and another one said yes. They would easily finish him off until 2 arrows appear and hit both of that guy's eyes. The archer who was there ends up getting scared, and he looks everywhere and asks where he had gone, but another arrow appears hitting that other guy's throat. They really didn't know where it was coming from, which direction it was, and then they end up running from there. After a while where they passed through the forest, and there was a guy hidden, that guy said he was there. One of the guys said to come out of the bush hidden, and that guy from before said for him to go alone. But that guy gets a little scared and goes to check that bush. He opens it, but there was nothing. But what he didn't expect is that Jake was behind him with an evil smile, and he ended up punching that guy. But one of the arrows goes towards Jake and hits him. He ends up taking it out easily, and his eyes were red. While he smiled, that guy screamed at him to die while shooting 2 more arrows, but Jake just throws himself on the ground, and those 2 arrows end up hitting a tree. Jake looked at that guy calmly and took an arrow. That guy wondered if he had lost sight of Jake, but that arrow ends hitting a branch that falls on that guy's head. He manages to defend it with his bow, and he was wondering where that arrow had gone, but he barely expected Jake to be behind him. Jake simply pierces the shore of that guy as he falls to the ground. Jake, with the evil smile, said he had heard. But then that one girl appears. She was shaking with fear, telling him to get away from him, and Jake was dominated by that strange feeling with red eyes. On the other side, the group was walking. Richard asked them to tell more about that archer who left the group. Adam asks if it was about Jake. He said there was not a lot of time. He said he thought they were just co-workers before it all started, and Richard asks if they were really just a co-worker. They seemed very friendly when they were leaving. Adam explained that he was the office manager, so protecting his team comes naturally to him. And it was always Richard who takes the fall. Adam shouldered and said that was a respectable trait. He said that he hoped he didn't think of him as a type of threat because things would get tense back there. He ends up giving a touch on Adam's chest and said it guaranteed him that none of his companions would suffer harm in his camp. They would work together to survive, and that was a fact. Adam is surprised he spoke camp. Richard said it was clear. He asked if he really thought they were just ordinary people. He ends up saying welcome to the base of operations. And it was a considerably large base. Richard, with a smile on his face, said it wasn't much, but they were growing with each passing day. Caroline looked at that place and said that it was incredible, while the other one with purple hair said that it wasn't bad at all and cozy. After a while, everyone was downstairs, and the boy from before said it was perfect. Adam looked back and asked what she thought. Caroline said it wasn't a 5-star hotel, but in that world there was better than nothing. Even better than that scary cave Richard calls it before everyone, and said that one of his men could show them where they would sleep. They sure told them to stay comfortable because it was their home. But then they hear some very strange noises, and that boy asks if they had heard that too. A girl comes running, very desperate, and Richard calls the guards. That blonde from before prepares his magic while Adam watches calmly. One of them screams to hold on because it was one of them. That girl was screaming boss, calling Richard. Richard didn't really understand the situation and asked where Nicholas was. Besides, he wanted to know what the hell had happened to her team. She said that everyone was dead and Richard was desperate, asking if that bastard Nicholas had betrayed him. He asks if he had killed everyone, but the girl said that he had died too. And Richard gets nervous, asking how come the girl said that that archer had ambushed them all. And Richard gets very nervous, asking if he, a simple person, a simple man, had killed everyone. He asked why she was alive since he had killed in general. The girl said that he wanted her to deliver a message to him. She said that he said he would give him a message. He fought well, and he was serious about what he said to Richard earlier. But Richard is still very nervous about the situation, and he pulled the girl away. He asked her what this escape was and asked her to spill the beans. Then the girl said that that guy wasn't normal at all. He was crazy, he was lactic, she said. He was definitely a monster. So that's it, guys. If you want next part, then like and comment. And subscribe our Manhwa Ghost YouTube channel for more quality full content. Thank you.